In Episode 9, I revealed that renowned Satanist Aleister Crowley joined a secret society called Ordo Templi Orientis and created a system of sex magic ritualism designed to help practitioners to open themselves up to communion with demons. Part of the ritual system includes the worship of a being known as Baphomet. Just who is Baphomet? He is none other than the primary rival to the Hebrew god Yahweh, also called Jehovah in the Old Testament of the Holy Bible. This rival's name was Baal. However, Baal was interpreted differently throughout the cultures of the ancient Near East. You may be more familiar with the name used by the Ammonites of the land of Canaan. They called him Molech, and he was the fire god to whom many sacrificed their own children. The earliest human civilization recognized by most scholars were the Sumerians. One of their prominent gods was Inanna, a mother fertility goddess. The next great civilization were the Mesopotamians, who transformed the Sumerian Inanna into their own fertility goddess known as Ishtar. It is from the cult of Ishtar that our modern Easter comes. Remember, the symbolism of a rabbit is used at Easter because the rabbit is known for its rapid reproduction, and the egg is also a fertility symbol. Many Christians today are unaware that elements of their Easter celebration is actually a modern form of ancient Ishtar worship. Over time, Ishtar came to be known by other names, depending on the culture. The Sidonians called her Ashtarte, and others called her Ashtaroth. Both versions were associated with sex and fertility rites using sex priestesses. Throughout the ancient Near East, this goddess worship spread into more patriarchal societies, where the goddess was reimagined as masculine. In Egypt, the god's name was Set. The god Set was a homosexual god of evil. During Egyptian worship ceremonies, the participants engaged in homosexual orgies, cannibalism, and even human sacrifice. Throughout the land of Canaan, the god was known by the name Baal. Baal was used by some as a proper name, while others used the word as a kind of title, essentially meaning Lord. Baal, or Molech, was reinterpreted many times by the various Canaanite cultures. While sex and fertility continued to be associated with the expanding versions of this god, the god also came to be known for war. The descendants of Abraham's nephew Lot were known as the Moabites. They referred to the god as Chemosh. Others called the god Milcom. The ancient Syrians called the god Melkart. Melkart was the god worshipped by Israel's king Ahab and his notoriously wicked wife, Queen Jezebel. King Solomon, the third king of Israel, was known for his hundreds of wives and concubines from foreign nations. To satisfy these wives, King Solomon built altars and engaged in worship of the many cultural variations of Baal. This sin was contrary to Yahweh's commandment to have no other gods before him, and led Yahweh to withdraw his protection over Israel, leading to a civil war that split the nation in half. Later, during the time of Elijah the prophet, Baal or Molech worship had become common in Israel. It was the priests of this god that Elijah challenged on Mount Carmel. As the story goes, Elijah stood against the hundreds of priests who had tried to bring down fire from heaven to consume a sacrifice to Baal. When they failed to do so, Elijah called upon Yahweh, who succeeded in burning up the sacrifice, leading the Israelites to reject the prophets of Baal and kill them. But the worship of this god was not so easily extinguished. The attributes of Molech were later used by the Greeks when they created the goddess Athena, and yet later, the Romans reinterpreted Athena as the goddess Minerva. Molech, Baal, Beelzebub, Baphomet. These gods are actually one god, interpreted differently according to the culture worshipping them. One consistent trait between these variations of the god is that each has required followers to perform human sacrifices using children. And throughout the millennia, they have almost always been represented by two primary symbols, the bull and the owl. Where have we seen this symbol? The owl is the symbol of the Bohemian Club. The Bohemians are wealthy, powerful elites who gather each summer in a redwood forest of California. They don druidic robes and stand before a giant owl statue, chanting while a mock human sacrifice is carried out by priests seeking Moloch's power to help them banish dull care and to be set free to engage in hedonistic activities. In episode 5, we discuss the testimony of young Paul Benassi, who said he was once kept in a cage at one of the Bohemian Grove retreats and witnessed another boy being sodomized by one of the adults, who afterward shot the boy in the head. Benassi himself was spared death by complying with the men's orders for him to sodomize the other boy's corpse, while the men recorded the activity on film. Benassi also testified that in another location, his captors taught him to worship a god named Set. It is crucial to understand the worship of Baphomet to be able to understand the use of innocent children who are trafficked for the purpose of these sex magic rituals. As a viewer, you don't need to believe that Baphomet is real. You don't even need to believe that God is real. What your beliefs are is irrelevant. What matters is what the cult members believe, and they completely believe that unseen demons and gods are real, and that those entities can be appeased through activities performed in sex magic rituals. Crowley's Thelema religion teaches that God's law of chastity must be strenuously violated. The ritual book used by Ordo Templi Orientis states this:
Dearly beloved, epops of the Illuminati, in the establishment of that tyranny and superstition which is called Christianity, much truth was stolen by the Black Lodge and perverted to its vile uses. And most noxious in its corruption is that castration of man called chastity, the atrophy of those noblest parts of the body which are the proper organs of redemption.
The ritual book goes on to quote numerous biblical scriptures about sexual purity and mocks them. Lower-level practices include exhausting the person through multiple partners, then allowing the person to begin to drift to sleep, only to awaken him and repeat the activities, until the candidate, quote, will enter a sleep of utter exhaustion resembling a coma, until the person is in a state that is neither awake nor asleep, and they are able to commune with their God. But the sexual practices of the Order of the Oriental Templars goes far beyond mere sexual perversion. It includes acts of child sacrifice and consumption of human blood and flesh. And this point takes us back to FBI Chief Ted Gunderson. I said in a previous episode that Gunderson uncovered a satanic child sex trafficking ring that was killing many of the children in ritual sacrifices. What I did not mention, however, is that Gunderson identified Ordo Templi Orientis as being the secret society that was carrying out the ritual killings. I have an old newspaper article that states that Gunderson was investigating Crowley's teaching about using sex magic to summon demons to do one's bidding through the ritual sacrifice of children, preferably with intelligent young boys. Gunderson believed that up to 50,000 missing children had been killed in such satanic rituals. We should pause for a moment to consider the question of just what constitutes a Satanist. There are many ideas and interpretations on what qualifies a person as a Satanist or a satanic ritual. Many people assume that all Satanists worship the figure from the Bible, who is often imagined as a man with horns and a pointy tail, holding a pitchfork in a pit in hell full of fire and brimstone. But we need not think of Satan in those terms, because very few Satanists think of Satan in those terms. In fact, most Satanists don't claim to worship a figure named Satan. They worship a pantheon of invisible spirits, demons, or gods. But whether they call the gods they worship by the name of Baal, Molech, Set, Minerva, or Baphomet, the characteristics and the attributes of the various gods demonstrate that they are each worshiping the same deity, despite which variation is being worshipped, and regardless of whether the deity was worshipped in the ancient past or in the present day, the figure always demands the same thing: sin. Sin is an act that is in direct contradiction to the commandments of the one true God. God commands people to love children. Molech commands people to kill children. God commands people to be sexually pure. Baphomet commands people to engage in sexual depravity. It is widely accepted among the world's major religions that there is a being that stands in constant opposition to the will of God, and that being is known as Satan or the devil. Therefore, it is reasonable to draw comparisons between the opposition of Satan to God and the opposition of Baphomet, Baal, and Molech to God, and to conclude that Baphomet, Baal, and Molech are all representations of Satan. So even if a member of the Ordo Templi Orientis is trying to appease an extra-dimensional being called Baphomet, he is in reality trying to appease Satan. This is why we may legitimately claim that the ritualism of Ordo Templi Orientis is actually Satanism or devil worship. And if you're still not convinced that these hedonistic practitioners of child sex abuse are not devil worshippers, and that this is all simply a case of satanic panic, then consider this information from an Ordo Templi Orientis ritual. The progression of the ritual is very similar in form to standard Masonic ceremonies. First, the candidate for the higher degree swears to defend the order with their last drop of blood and with the last penny of their purse. The candidate then seals their oath by having a cross cut into their right arm with a stiletto, and then dips their thumb into the blood to seal their oath. After this swearing in, the candidate is then taken to another room to offer up their blood. After secret signs, handshakes, and passwords are given, they address their God. This is what the ritual book says, quote,
"Behold our God Baphomet, the unutterable one, the bearer of the Holy Grail."
And then the candidate, while kneeling, is made to partake of the, quote, mystic feast of the Sabbath. This feast includes a cup of blood mixed with laudanum, which is a combination of alcohol and opium, which is to prepare the candidate for the sexual orgy he is about to participate in. The question naturally arises, where does the blood in the cup come from? For that answer, I had to consult another chapter in the ritual manual. Just like in the ancient worship of Baal, during the orgies, some of the virgin priestesses become pregnant, which is one of the goals of the orgy. Let me read directly from the manual, quote,
"If, by the favor and indwelling of the Holy Ghost, the priestess does conceive and bring forth, then the child is baptized by its father, the priest, for purification by water and for the consecration by fire. The child is roasted and divided among the worshippers for use as a sacrament, as a talisman, and as a medicine against all diseases. This is also said of the knights of our own holy order of the temple, that the offspring of any one of them by a virgin was roasted, and an unguent made of its fat, wherewith to anoint the Magian and ineffable figure of Baphomet."
Do you understand what we just read? These modern-day Satanists try to get virgins pregnant during sex orgies so that they can take the children born from these women and roast them to eat, to use in rituals, and to offer as a burnt sacrifice to Baphomet, who is the ancient Molech, the same god who the globalists worship and offer sacrifices to in the Bohemian Grove, while also engaging in sex orgies. Here is more, quote,
"Thus, preferably a child, but also an adult, is taken and ceremonially slain so that not a drop of blood is lost, lest the spirit of the victim, taking refuge in that drop, escape the exorcist. This blood is then consumed as a sacrament or employed for talismanic purposes. For once the spirit of the slain one is sealed up into the spilt and gathered blood, it is multiplied in every part thereof, even as in the mass of the body of Christ is said to be equally in all the myriad consecrated hosts."
As there is a great amount of material in this ritual book which I possess, a deeper look into the symbolism and methodology of the rituals must be made. Join me in the next episode as I share with you extensive detail from the rituals of Ordo Templi Orientis and explain how children are abused and sacrificed to Baphomet in exchange for an increase of power to the practitioner. These are horrid topics. This is not a subject matter that I take any personal delight in discussing, but the horrible truth is that right now, this very day, there are innocent children in the United States of America who will be raped, and murdered by powerful people who infest the chambers of power both in and out of our government. Until this evil practice is eradicated, unfortunately, we have no choice but to continue trying to bring this satanic activity out of darkness and into the light.